Hello everybody, Mr. Tom here. Welcome back to reading. Last week we read a story about a boy and how he didn't like to do his homework, but he came to find a way to enjoy it and to learn from it. This week we're not going to be reading about doing chores or homework. I'm going to read you a story called simply Hide and Seek, and it's about a story about how a few kids play a game of hide and seek and how it becomes the adventure of a lifetime. So without further ado, I will get started. James, his sister Sally, and Mark, their best friend, were bored. They had played all day, but now that it was dark and difficult to see, they had nothing to do. They couldn't play soccer because they couldn't see the ball. They didn't want to go inside and play a game because it was a beautiful springtime night, and they liked being outside, especially after having to play inside all winter long. They didn't know what to do, and it was a little too early for them to go home. "I guess I'll just go home," Mark said in a sad voice. "Aw, come on," replied James. "We still have time for another game of something." Then Sally said, "I have an idea. Let's play hide and seek." "I was just going to say that," James said. "Yeah, I'll bet," replied his sister. "You always say you were thinking of whatever I think," she snapped. "Do not," James said in a loud voice. "Do too," yelled Sally. Mark just looked down at the ground and shook his head from side to side. "There they are at it again," he mumbled to himself. Then he yelled, "Okay, let's play hide and seek. I'll be the seeker." He turned, faced a big tree, closed his eyes, and started counting out loud. 100, 99, 98, 97. Sally and Mark stopped arguing, looked at each other, and ran off into different directions to find hiding places. In the distance, they could still hear Mark counting. 4, 3, 2, 1. "Ready or not, here I come!" Then he turned and began looking for places where they could be hiding. Finding Sally was easy. She always ran off and then circled back, so she could be close to base. The safe place to get to before being tagged. Mark looked for the biggest tree and ran towards it, but she wasn't there. "I'll bet she's behind that big bush," he said to himself. So he ran to it and was ready to tag her, but she wasn't there either. As he turned around, he saw James turning towards base and darted after him. Just before he touched James's shoulder, James tagged the base and yelled out, "Safe!" "Did you get Sally yet?" James asked. "No," said Mark. "I haven't been able to find her, and it's getting late, and we need to be heading home." So both boys yelled out, "Come on out, Sally, it's late!" But there was no reply. Not even a little snicker from somewhere in the darkness. They yelled again, "Come on out, Sally, it's late!" Still, there was no reply from Sally. They began to worry and started searching for her. As they walked around the area, they called out, "Sally, come on! We give up! You're safe!" But no matter where they looked or how much they called out, Sally didn't answer. It was as if she disappeared. Sally was wondering what had happened. All she could remember was crawling into the big tree of a fallen tree to hide. Now as she looked up, she saw several stars through a small hole above her head. She had fallen into a hole when she crawled under the tree trunk. "Help!" She yelled and heard a voice echo throughout what must have been a cave. "Help! Help! Help! Help!" "Did you hear that, James?" Mark said excitedly. "Sally just yelled for help." "Keep yelling, Sally!" James screamed. "That way we can find you." Sally heard her brother and kept screaming. After a short while, the boys were standing next to the big tree trunk. "Hey, are you stuck under this tree?" asked James. "Kind of," Sally yelled. "When I crawled under it to hide, I fell into a cave. Please help me, I'm scared. It's dark and I can't get out." Mark said, "James, you stay with Sally and I'll go get my dad." Then he dashed off into the darkness. "Don't be scared," James said. "I'm right here with you." "No, you're not," Sally sobbed. "You're up there and I'm down here." As Sally turned into the darkness of the cave, she bumped into something, screamed, and began to cry. "What's wrong?" James yelled. There's something down here with me." Sally replied in a shaky voice. Just then, Mark and his dad came running through the woods. Mark's father knelt down and asked Sally if she was okay. He could hear her crying and sobbing. "Sally, are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I'm scared and there's something else down here with me." "Stand back, Sally. I'm lowering a rope and we'll be down with you in a second." Mark's dad tied the rope to the tree, found the hole under the tree trunk, wiggled a bit, and lowered himself into the cave. Sally could see him coming down the rope and stopped crying. Not only was he there, but the cave became brighter from the beam of his flashlight as it danced across the cave's floor and walls. As he reached the floor of the cave, he shone the light on Sally and gave her a big hug. "Don't be frightened," he said. "I'll have you out of here in no time." Then he shone the light around and saw that she had fallen into a small cave. And very close to her, in the middle of the cave, was something wrapped in layers of old blankets. "Mark, James, there's something down here. I'm going to tie it to the rope and I want you to pull it out. Okay?" Okay, they replied. The boys pulled out the object, untied it, and let the loose end of the rope fall back into the cave. The cave wasn't deep, and Mark's dad boosted Sally over his head so she could crawl out. He then grabbed the rope with a little jump, and was able to grab the opening and pull himself up. "Let's go back to my house for a cup of hot tea. I'll call your parents so they aren't worried, and we'll see what treasure Sally found," he said. When they got to Mark's house, they sipped their tea, and began unwrapping the treasure. They carefully peeled off layers of old blankets and cloth to reveal a wooden box. They slowly opened it and stared in amazement. "Oh my," Sally said in disbelief. "I don't believe what I'm seeing." The boys and Mark's father just stared. Inside the box were jewels of every color you could imagine. There were diamonds, rubies, sapphires, and emeralds of all shapes and sizes. Intermixed, they could see several gold coins and strands of pearls. "We're rich!" the boys screamed. "Not quite," interrupted Mark's father. "Someone could have lost this, and I don't think you should plan on spending any of it until we find out a little more. Besides, Sally found it." "I'll share it," Sally said happily. "That's nice, Sally," replied Mark's dad. "But the right thing to do is to contact the authorities." The next day, the four of them and Sally's mother drove to the police station, explaining what had happened, and gave the treasure to the police to hold while they conducted their investigation. They left the police station sadly, and even the double-dipped ice cream cones Mark's father brought for them didn't make them smile. They drove back in silence. Several weeks passed with no word from the police. Then, one evening, Mark's father called James, Sally, and their parents. "The police just called, and I think you should come over right now," he said. "I'm afraid there's some bad news about the treasure. The police are on their way and will explain everything when you get here." Sally and James didn't say much during the ride to Mark's house. Sally thought that since it was bad news, the treasure belonged to someone else, even though they probably lost it. "Whatever happened to the finders keepers?" she mumbled. "What did you say, Sally?" her mom asked. "Oh, nothing," she replied. Then she let out a long, sad sigh that echoed through the car. When they arrived at Mark's house, the police were there with the treasure box. As Sally entered, the captain introduced himself and said, "Sally, this is yours. Your parents need to sign some papers, but the box and its contents are yours." Sally, Mark, and James shrieked with joy and danced around the room. Then Sally said, "What's the bad news?" The captain smiled and said, "The treasure is worth more than money you can imagine, and with your newfound wealth comes great responsibility." Sally didn't quite understand what the captain was talking about, and right now it didn't really matter. Mark asked, "Are you going to share?" "Of course," Sally said. "If you and James didn't help me, I might still be there." Several days later, Sally asked everyone over to her house. "I have decided what to do with the money from the treasure after it is sold," she said. I'm going to give 1/6 to our mom and dad, 1/6 to Mark's mom and dad, 1/6 to Mark, 1/6 to James, and 1/6 for me. There's an extra 1/6. Mark proudly stated. He loved math and was right on top of Sally's calculations. "No, there's not," Sally said. "It is too," James said. "It's not," Sally said in an angered voice, just as Mark was going to say, There they are at it again," Sally said. This is why there isn't an extra 1/6. I'm going to give it to the local charity, so it can be given to those less fortunate and in need." Her mother and father said it was a caring and responsible thing to do. They were very proud of her and knew that she understood what the captain meant when he had turned the treasure box over to her just days before. And that's the end of Hide and Seek. So, this was good. If we take these lessons into account, well, first I'd say if you're playing hide and seek, be very careful. Don't want to end up like Sally, where you fall into something that dangerous. And I don't think you'll find a treasure chest. But if you were to ever find something like that, it's good not to just take it, the finders keepers and whatnot. It's good to do the right thing and contact the authorities and do what Sally did. And then she ended up giving the money to more unfortunate people, which was very good. And that's a good lesson to know, is to think of others before yourself sometimes, like she did. But always be safe when you're playing hide and seek outside. You don't want to fall in a hole. But that was hide and seek. I hope you enjoyed this. This was a little longer video than the other ones. But next week we'll come back with another story, another short story. I hope you look forward to that. So stay healthy, stay safe, and enjoy your week. Bye.